Hey, welcome back to Woodworking with Wes. We have a project. If you want to impress your friends with your woodworking skills, let's get started. In this video, I will guide you through the process of constructing a distinctive planter box that stands out from all the rest. Get ready to bring your green space to life. Okay, step one, like a lot of our project, we start with a whiteboard. We're going to start with a circle that will help us get our math. Now what we did is I drew a circle. This is a 30 and a 60 degree angle mark by measuring along this inside line. This is our piece of wood out here. By measuring along this line here, we were able to determine the lengths we wanted to do. Now we're going to be doing 1 5/16 by 1 5/16 squares. We're initially going to make our cut 9 1/2, and then we're going to cut a 30 degree angle at 9 1/4. Let's get started there. In step two, we take the 2x4s that we purchased from our big box store, and we're going to cut them into 1 1/2 inch strips. Now, a 2x4 is 3 1/2 inches wide. 1 1/2 and 1 1/2 is 3. So I've taken off the rounded over mill edge and made a flat edge. And let's go ahead and set up and cut our 1 1/2. I have it set at 1 1/2. You can see how we now have two nice 1 1/2 inch squares ready for the next step. By the way, I want you to stay with me at the end. I'm going to tell you how much money I spent for all the materials to make this planter box. Step 3 begins by planing our 1 1/2 inch squares on all 4 sides. I mark the one side as it comes through the planer and rotate it 1/4 turn to complete the first thickness. Then I change the planer depth for the next pass. I continue to do this until I reach the 1 5/16 square. Next, I cut my pieces to 9 1/2 inches in length on my saw sled. Step 4 will begin on the chop saw. With our 1 5/16 block cut to 9 1/2 inches, we now have our miter saw set at 30 degrees and a stop block set at 9 1/4 inch, and we're going to make a 30 degree cut at the end of our block. With our angles all cut, and based upon the math that we did with our whiteboard, we've got to make a line on here, and I'm going to show you what that line is all about, but we've got to make a line at 7 1/4, and we want it to be even on every piece. So I'm going to take and clamp 6 of these pieces together, which is enough to make one level. We want to keep those nice and straight. We're going to take our square. I've marked one here and here so that we line it up, and yes, they line up perfectly. Square. We'll make a little mark there. Now let me show you what that mark is all about. Let's take our clamp off. As we put these pieces together, this will go together like this, and that line indicates where that attachment is going to be for different pieces. And so as we put together our pieces, it's going to start looking like that, and it'll go the rest of the way around our circle. Let's go ahead and assemble one. Step 5 begins the assembly part of our planter box, and we do that. We begin by putting some Titebond 3 on our angle piece and carefully lining it up with the mark that we just got through making. Now this is kind of the tricky part. You've got to make sure that you have the point of that angle right on that line we just drew, and then we're going to take our 18 gauge nailer and we're going to give 2 1 1/4 inch brads right there to hold it in place until we complete the 6 pieces that make our circle. With our circle all put together, and we just need to make sure that our joint is tied together really good, we're going to drill a pilot hole, and we're going to put a 2-inch deck screw. The reason we're using deck screws is this might be an outdoor planter. And so we want to be able to not worry about having any issues with the wrong kind of screws. That's why we use Titebond 3 waterproof glue. And we're going to put a screw like that in every joint. One last step before we do our final assembly is just a little bit of sanding. We're just going to go through. I'm going to sand the joints down so they're level. And then we're going to take just a piece of hand sandpaper and we're just going to sand the corners enough to take off the sharp edge. Just like that. And we'll do that all the way around both sides. Our final step, step 6, is to assemble all of these levels that we've put together, all these little hexagons that we put together. Now we create this effect by reversing each level, and it kind of gives a cross stack effect. We line up our boards on the inside and our seams in the corners, just like that, and that gives us that effect. First thing we're going to do though is we're going to give a little bead of Titebond 3 around the top of our level. Set it on there and line up our inside. If we line up our inside correctly, our outside takes care of itself. So we just make sure that our inside is smooth and our corners are lined up. We have put a 2-inch nail into our 18 gauge brad nailer. We're just going to put a few nails, just 3 around here, to hold it in place. And then we're going to give a 2.5-inch screw, well, let's see, every other side, so only 3 of the sides. And that will pull this level down good and tight, and then we'll do the next level. Okay, here's our final level. Now I've done every level exactly the same. A little bit of glue, a couple of nails, screws to pull it all together. So every level has been done exactly the same to give us this outside effect of a cross stack. It just makes such a unique look for the outside. Now I promised you at the beginning of this video that I would tell you how much this cost. I bought 4 10-foot 2x4s from our big box store. Those 4 2x4s cost me about $20 at my local one. If you count in the glue and the screws and the sandpaper and anything else that I've used, oops, we gotta put a pilot hole here. If you count all of those things, this planter box, all the way through, except for any finish that you might want to use, has only been less than $30. Everything. Now these top screws that I'm putting in, let me show you there, that top screw. If I were to paint or stain or anything like that, I would fill the nails and the screws on the top level just so that it would be nice and clean before I painted and stained. If I was going to use this for an exterior use, I might take one of my deck screws, put underneath and leave it up about this much, and that would allow water to flow out underneath without touching any of the wood. If I was to use it for an interior use, what I would probably do is cut a solid bottom that was the same shape and then just have it for an interior use. And I don't know what I'm going to do yet, so I'm leaving it. This is just raw wood, and we'll show you what it looks like all together with a plan in it and stuff, but I haven't decided whether I want to be inside or outside. And by the way, I made this out of just 2x4 construction from my big box store. If you were going to have this for an exterior use, you might want to use redwood or cedar or cypress, all good exterior water resistant woods. I'm doing this just mostly so you can see how it goes together and you can get a little more creative with the kind of wood that you want to use. Let's go ahead and get a pot in it, see what it looks like. Well, I love the way this planter box came out. It has a very unique look to it, and it looks kind of complicated, but you know, every project that looks complicated doesn't need to be. We just showed you, if you follow the steps, you can build something just like this on Woodworking with Wes.